2 deaths, 1 butler. Wolfe doesn't believe in chance. Welcome to Marple Mysteries. I'm your host, Harrington. Tell me where you're tuning in from today. Your comments truly matter. I don't usually notice shoes unless they squeak, trip me on the stairs, or belong to a woman worth following down Madison Avenue. But when Horace Nettleton stepped into the brownstone that Tuesday morning, I spotted his before I even got a look at his face. Black cap toes buffed to a scandalous shine, like he'd just finished reading them a bedtime story and kissing them goodnight. That, plus the gloves tucked military tight beneath one elbow, gave the game away. "Butler," I said, before he even opened his mouth. He blinked once. "Indeed, sir. I serve Mr. Lemuel Quayle of the West 89th Quails, and—" "I get it," I said. "You answer bells and keep skeletons in closets. Follow me." I didn't wait for him to explain which Quayle he meant. They all spelled old money with capital O and smelled faintly of varnish. This guy didn't look rattled, but he did glance around like the walls were testing him. Wolfe was in the plant room, and I figured I had a minute or two to figure out what this guy really wanted, or at least what he thought he did. We settled in the front room. He declined the chair as if afraid it might stain his trousers with something common. I sat. "I'm Horace," he said. "I've worked for the Quails for 21 years. I came because I was told you, Mr. Wolfe, rather, accepts unusual matters." I tapped my pen on the desk. "We do. Unusuals are bread and butter. What's yours?" He hesitated. "This past Friday I attended a funeral. Mr. Lemuel Quayle's sister, Constance. A closed affair. Private chapel. Old family friends. Former piano teachers, that sort." "I'm following," I said. "Yesterday," he continued, smoothing his lapel, "I attended another funeral. For a woman named Enid Severin. Let me guess. Same casket?" He didn't even flinch. "Number but the same mourners. The same 6, down to the woman in green gloves who cries without making a sound." I sat up. 2 funerals. Same attendees. Not a coincidence. That was my thought, especially considering Miss Severin was, to my knowledge, still very much alive last Thursday. She sent the Quails a card. Tulips. Handwritten. I raised a brow. "You're sure of that?" "I collect the mail, and I don't forget handwriting." He reached into his coat and handed me a card with looping cursive that said, "To Lemuel and Constance. Thinking of you always. Enid. Postmarked Thursday. Dead by Sunday." "And you think what?" I asked. He looked me dead in the eye. "I think someone is lying about who died, and I think someone else may not be dead at all." That's when Wolfe entered, smelling faintly of orchids and impatience. He took one look at Nettleton and arched a brow. "Butler," Wolfe said, "you're either bringing us trouble or attempting to remove it discreetly." Horace gave a slight bow. "I would not presume, sir, but I believe something is very wrong." Wolfe looked at me. "Archie. Tea. That's how I knew he was going to take the case. Not because he liked tea, he doesn't, but because offering it to a butler is the equivalent of throwing down the gauntlet." "Very well," Wolfe said, lowering himself into his chair. "Begin again." Slowly. And Nettleton did. With precision, with polish, just like his shoes. Nettleton didn't sit during his retelling, which made him harder to read. People tend to relax into their chairs, but standing leaves you with nothing but the angle of the shoulders and how long a man pauses before a name. Wolfe let him talk. No interruptions, just a low, rhythmic grunt every 3rd paragraph, like the story was being filed directly into some creaky card catalog inside his skull. The account boiled down to this. Enid Severin, longtime friend of the Quails, had supposedly died of natural causes on Sunday. Her funeral, hastily arranged, took place at a private chapel Monday morning. But she had mailed a handwritten note, dated Thursday, to Constance Quayle, who had died on Wednesday and been buried Friday. If you're following that without a pencil, you're doing better than I was. Wolfe's eyes stayed closed for most of it, but when Nettleton mentioned the name of the officiant at both services, Dr. Willoughby Rusk, Wolfe's eyes opened. Doctor of what? Wolfe asked. Episcopal, I believe, Nettleton said. Belief isn't fact, Wolfe murmured. I took it as my cue. Want me to dig into the Reverend Boss? In time, Wolfe said. Continue, Mr. Nettleton. The butler took a breath. It was Miss Severin's presence at Miss Quayle's funeral that began to disturb me, or rather, her absence. She had always said she hoped to sing at Miss Quayle's service. They had grown up together, but instead, she vanished. And when she was declared dead 2 days later, no autopsy, no doctor, no notice. It rang oddly, as if the death had been assigned. He reached into his coat again, this time producing 2 folded sheets, identical funeral programs printed on thick white stock. Same typeface, same decorative border, same pale watermark of lilies, only the names differed. Wolfe extended a hand without looking. I passed the papers over. There's a crease on the lower left, Nettleton noted. On both. Wolfe nodded once, holding the programs by the corners. A print run, not one at a time. They were produced together. It would seem so. And no relation between the deceased women. Only long friendship, Nettleton said. From childhood, summer neighbors in Montauk. They used to joke they'd be buried side by side. That, Wolfe said, is not humor I appreciate. I was about to ask a follow-up when the doorbell rang. I glanced at the clock, barely past noon. Deliveries don't come that early unless they're coffee or bad news. Fritz, ever the soul of silence, beat me to the door. A moment later, he reappeared with one arched eyebrow. A woman to see Mr. Wolfe, he said. She gives the name Enid Severin. Now that got everyone's attention. She's alive, Nettleton asked quietly. Wolfe narrowed his eyes. Archie, bring her in. I led the way. Enid Severin was small and lean, with silver-shot hair pinned back tight, like she didn't trust the wind not to whisper secrets. She wore a lavender coat with thin black gloves and carried a worn leather purse she kept two-handed like it might start leaking. Her eyes scanned the room like she was trying to memorize exits. I'm not here for games, she said to Wolfe before I could close the door behind her. I've come because I was told someone is impersonating me, and that my death has been scheduled. Miss Severin, Wolfe said, gesturing toward the red chair. You are not here to dictate terms. You will sit or you will leave. She looked at me. I gave a shrug that said, This is his church, lady. She sat. You're alive, Wolfe said simply. Yes. You did not attend Constance Quayle's funeral. No. You sent a card before her death. I did. Why did you not appear? I was told not to. By whom? Her lips parted, but she hesitated. Then, Lemuel. Ah, Wolfe said, not as satisfaction, but as confirmation of a suspicion he'd already filed and boxed. Lemuel Quayle told you to stay away from his sister's funeral. Yes. Did he say why? He said it would upset things, that Constance's affairs were being watched closely. He didn't say by whom. And you accepted this explanation? No, not entirely. I stayed away because I was afraid. Of what? Of being next. That's when I moved to the corner and flipped open my notebook. I didn't need Wolfe's nod. If someone faked your death, showed up at your funeral, and left you breathing without a paper trail, you were either very powerful or very scared. She didn't look powerful. Wolfe leaned forward slightly. Not far, just enough for the change in angle to signal an escalation. Miss Severin. If you are truly Miss Severin, and truly not deceased, then someone has declared otherwise. That requires motive. Who would benefit from your absence? She tightened her grip on the purse. That depends. On what? On whether they were after the truth or the inheritance. I leaned in. What inheritance? She hesitated. Constance left everything to Lemuel. But if something happened to him, it came to me. I looked at Wolfe. Wolfe closed his eyes again, and for a moment I could hear the plants breathing in the next room. You were named in Constance Quayle's will. Yes. And Lemuel knew this. I believe so, though he never said it outright. Nettleton cleared his throat. Miss Severin, if I may, you are certain Lemuel instructed you not to attend? She nodded once. He straightened. Then I must tell you that he told me you were traveling abroad. In Prague, he said. That you'd left no forwarding address. I haven't been to Prague in 15 years, she said. Wolfe sighed. The necessary conclusion, then, is that Lemuel Quayle fabricated your absence. Likely arranged a funeral for an empty casket. Or worse. Mr. Goodwin. Yeah, boss. You will find Mr. Saul Panzer and dispatch him to confirm the burial. You want him to dig her up? Number I want him to confirm if there is a body at all. And the Reverend? Wolfe gave a nod. Yes. Rusk. Find out who he is, where he was ordained, and why he conducted 2 private funerals for closely tied women within 4 days of each other. Got it. As I pulled on my coat, Wolfe turned back to Miss Severin. You will stay in the city, Miss Severin. I have nowhere else to go. Then you will remain in contact. No travel. No unexplained disappearances. Someone has gone to great effort to remove you from the narrative. Let's not assist them. She gave a small nod and stood. Nettleton offered to escort her to a cab. I let them go without escorting them to the door. Wolfe didn't like people lingering. When I returned, Wolfe was already making notes on the back of the funeral programs with one of his gold pens. I think, he murmured, that someone has invented a funeral to delay a murder. I didn't ask what he meant. I had legwork to do, and if this kept going the way it smelled, I'd need a fresh notebook. Maybe 2. I caught Saul Panzer just before he stepped onto a downtown crosstown bus. He was easy to spot in his wool coat and hat pulled down tight, looking like an off-duty librarian with a black belt. I gave him the basic rundown, minus the flourishes. Saul doesn't like poetry with his assignments. He asked 2 questions, nodded once, and then vanished into a crowd so fast I half wondered if I'd imagined him. My next stop was St. Willoughby's Episcopal Chapel on East 61st. The place had ivy like a lace collar and the silence of a library. I found Dr. Rusk in his office, signing a stack of thank-you letters with a Mont Blanc that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. He wore wire-rimmed glasses and had the kind of smile that makes people confess things they shouldn't. I understand you conducted 2 private services recently, I said. Miss Constance Quayle and Miss Enid Severin. His smile didn't waver. That's correct. But Enid Severin's alive. The pen stopped mid-stroke. I beg your pardon. She's breathing, talking, and very concerned someone is trying to give her a headstone ahead of schedule. Dr. Rusk blinked, removed his glasses, and leaned back slowly. Mr. Goodwin, Archie Goodwin. Yes, I'm afraid this is most irregular. I conducted the service because Mr. Lemuel Quayle provided all documentation, including a signed death certificate from a physician named Dr. Abner Tilney. That a name you know? Not personally. But I don't question documentation unless something appears untoward. I gave him a look that said, "This is the part where you think something's untoward." He took the hint and opened a drawer, pulling out a file folder. Inside were copies of the paperwork Lemuel had provided, the death certificate, a cremation order, and a letter requesting a closed service due to emotional strain. "Did you see the body?" I asked. He shook his head. Mr. Quayle said it had already been handled. I'm afraid this was not uncommon for the Quayles. Very private, reserved. And the same for Constance. That service did have a viewing, he said. Brief. The body was present. Closed casket until the final moment. But you were told they were childhood friends. Yes. Ever wonder why their funerals weren't held together, or why the same 6 mourners showed up to both? He stiffened. I do not make it my business to question grief. That's your first mistake, I said. Grief is just motive wearing nicer shoes. I took a copy of the paperwork and left him staring at his pen like it had betrayed him. On the way back to the brownstone, I called Lon Cohen at the Gazette to see if he could find a record on Dr. Abner Tilney. He grunted, said he'd try, and hung up before I could say thank you. When I returned, Wolfe was at his desk with both feet flat on the floor and a sheet of graph paper spread before him like a battlefield. Fritz brought him beer, and he didn't touch it. Rusk is real, I said. He did the services. But for Enid's funeral, he never saw a body, just paperwork. Fabricated, Wolfe said. Inevitable. Cremation request included. From a doctor named Tilney Wolfe opened a drawer and handed me an envelope. Inside was a photograph of a burial plot. A temporary headstone marked Enid Severin, fresh sod, no flowers. Saul had done his part. So they buried something, I said. Or nothing, Wolfe replied. I leaned on the desk. You think they staged a cremation on paper, then filled a casket with rocks and buried it instead? I think, Wolfe said slowly, that Lemuel Quayle wanted to delay any claim Miss Severin might make against his estate. By pronouncing her dead, he bought time, and perhaps tested whether her absence would be noticed. She was in hiding. She was in fear, which amounts to the same. That's when the phone rang. Wolfe answered, which meant the call mattered. Yes, he said. When? And you're certain? I see. Thank you. He hung up and looked at me. Mr. Lemuel Quayle was found this afternoon, seated in his armchair, deceased. No sign of struggle. No forced entry. I blinked. Natural causes. A sedative overdose, according to preliminary reports. But that will change. Who found him? Nettleton. Of course he did. Wolfe finally took a sip of beer. Now, he said, they will assume it ends here. That Lemuel's fraud collapsed under its own weight, but that is precisely what we must not believe. Why not? Because the motive has changed shape. I didn't need it explained. Lemuel faked a death, maybe to prevent her will from being contested. But now he was dead, and Enid stood next in line for the estate, which meant someone else had an interest in making her disappear. Again, we were no longer investigating a phantom funeral. We were hunting a very real killer. Wolfe called Saul, gave him orders to track down Dr. Abner Tilney. Credentials, address, connections. Meanwhile, I phoned Miss Severin and told her to meet us back at the brownstone in 1 hour. She didn't argue. Fear makes people punctual. She arrived pale and breathless, clutching that same leather purse like it had grown heavier. I let her in and stayed with her in the front room while Wolfe arranged his notes. When Fritz came in to ask about dinner, Wolfe told him curtly, "Not yet." "Lemuel is dead," Wolfe said when Miss Severin sat. "You are now heir to the Quayle estate." She didn't respond immediately, just stared into the carpet. "You're not surprised," I said. She began, then stopped. "No. Because you knew someone was hunting him? Because he told me last week that if anything happened to him, I should go straight to Nero Wolfe." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. He anticipated a threat. He knew something was coming. He said someone was cleaning house. That made Wolfe sit forward. "Explain." I don't know what he meant. He said Constance had discovered something about the foundation's finances. She wanted to go public. Then she got sick, quickly. He said she wasn't supposed to die, only to be discredited. And you? I think I was next. Or maybe he didn't know who was next. He just knew there was a list. What is the Quayle Foundation? A family endowment. Funds charities, scholarships, preservation grants. Lemuel oversaw it personally. And now? Now I inherit it. Wolfe closed his eyes again, pinched the bridge of his nose and breathed out. We need to see the Foundation's books. They won't let me. Then we will make them. Wolfe rang for me and handed over a list. Names, contacts, files to pull. By now it was after 6, and Fritz had stopped hovering politely. He reappeared with a look that meant, feed him, or I'll do it myself. Wolfe gave a begrudging nod. Dinner would be served. But the murder wasn't on pause. When I left to call Lon Cohen again and swing by the Quayle Foundation's Midtown office, Wolfe sat in silence, staring at the funeral program with Enid's name on it. It wasn't just a fake death anymore. Now we had a real one. And someone who had already proven they could fake the end of a life might be just as capable of ending one for real. Whoever they were, they'd attended both funerals. And now they were 2 for 2. By the time I reached the Quayle Foundation's Midtown office, the streets had started their usual evening transformation. Suits loosening collars, cabs snapping shut, steam rising from sidewalk grates like the city itself was letting off tension. The Foundation's building was a modest gray slab nestled between a high-end law firm and a florist that hadn't changed its window display since Valentine's Day. Inside, the lobby had the muted hush of old money trying not to draw attention to itself. I introduced myself to the receptionist, who had the good sense to look skeptical but not obstructive. She disappeared into a back office and returned with a woman in her 40s. Severe bob haircut, and the kind of heels that said, "I'm important, and don't make me prove it." "I'm Isabel Rain," she said crisply. "I'm the Foundation's legal coordinator. You said you were calling on behalf of Mr. Wolfe." "That's right, Archie Goodwin." Her expression didn't shift. "And the nature of the inquiry?" "We're investigating irregularities surrounding the deaths of both Constance and Lemuel Quayle." She blinked. That got her. "Mr. Quayle passed just today. It's premature to suggest irregularity." "Maybe. But when a woman fakes her own death and still manages to show up for tea, premature becomes relative." She didn't smile. "You'll need to be more specific." I handed her one of Wolfe's neatly printed notes, requesting access to financial ledgers from the Foundation, the most recent annual grant disbursements, and a list of internal approvals on all accounts over $50,000 for the last fiscal year. "Miss Severin will soon be reviewing this herself," I said, "but Mr. Wolfe prefers not to wait." She scanned the note, lips tightening with every line. "Give me a moment." She left me in a waiting room where the magazines were laminated, and the art was abstract enough to suggest tax write-off. 10 minutes later, she returned with a folder an inch thick and a smaller envelope. "I'm giving you the summary records," she said. "Nothing confidential until there's an official transfer of authority, but these are all public-facing numbers. Appreciate it." "One thing," she added. Lemuel had been fixated on consolidating accounts for the last few months. Very focused. Had a private meeting 2 weeks ago with someone I didn't recognize. Wouldn't let me sit in. "Any name?" "Number, but the man had a small red pin on his lapel. Like a flower." "Carnation?" "Possibly." I tucked the folder under my arm and stepped out into the night. A red carnation. Not exactly a smoking gun, but Wolfe didn't believe in ornaments without significance. When I got back to the brownstone, Fritz was in the hallway with a raised eyebrow. "He didn't touch the trout," he said. That meant something was bothering Wolfe more than usual. I found him in the office with Miss Severin and Saul Panzer. Saul was flipping through a notepad. "She wasn't cremated," Saul said without preamble. "No body?" I asked. "No paperwork. The crematorium listed on the certificate has never handled anyone named Severin. They've never heard of Dr. Nero Wolfe gestured toward the files I was holding. I passed them over, and he opened the envelope first. Inside was a single-page breakdown of recent disbursements. Standard grants, some local preservation initiatives, and a $250,000 strategic outreach gift to a group called Beacon Reach Consulting. Wolfe's brow lowered like a curtain. That name again. You've seen it before? Miss Severin asked. In the corner of a report from 2 years ago, Constance mentioned them. I dismissed it at the time. Should I go find them? I asked. Number, you'll find her. Her. Constance had a confidant. They met monthly at the Met Cloisters. Name, Junior Frelling. Constance kept her off foundation documents, but mentioned her in a letter Fritz intercepted from the wastebasket. Fritz appeared in the doorway at the mention of his name, gave a modest nod, and retreated without a word. I remember the letter, Wolfe said. She described Junior as the only one who listens when I say I'm afraid. Miss Severin's hands gripped the armrests. Afraid of what? We'll find out, I said, already rising. Wolfe didn't even glance at me. Tomorrow, early. Bring flowers. Cloisters at 10. I left the room with Saul, who handed me a photo on the way out, a blurry street capture of the man from the funeral. Red carnation in the lapel. Tall. Scar on his chin like someone had tried to erase him with a jagged pencil. Got him at the Quail burial, Saul said. Same guy turned up at Severin's fake one. Watching. Never approached. Can you tail him? I already am. He disappeared down the steps before I could thank him. Typical Panzer. Next morning, I arrived at the Cloisters with a bouquet of early irises and a pair of walking shoes I regretted within minutes. I found Junior Frelling on a bench overlooking the Hudson, feeding crumbs to birds and sipping from a thermos like a woman who'd made peace with half the world and was still making up her mind about the other half. You're not Constance, she said before I even opened my mouth. No, ma'am, Archie Goodwin. She gave a quiet sigh. I hoped it wouldn't come to this. Come to what? She didn't answer, just patted the bench beside her. She said you were the only one she trusted. I was the only one who told her she wasn't crazy. That's not the same thing. I waited. She found errors, Junior said. Small ones. A few thousand missing here, a few more shifted there. Money that was supposed to fund historic sites ended up in consulting firms that never returned calls. When she brought it up to Lemuel, he said it was temporary. Liquidity adjustments. But then Beacon Reach appeared, and things stopped adding up. Did she try to investigate? She hired a forensic accountant. Young man. Smart. Last I heard, he moved out of state without notice. Name? Ethan Mendez. Lives in Flatbush. Or did. I jotted it down. And the red carnation? Junior's eyes darkened. That's their signature. I don't know the whole group, but whoever's behind Beacon Reach uses it to signal loyalty. Or silence. Lemuel wore one the last time I saw him. Looked terrified. The breeze lifted a few petals from her bouquet. She didn't try to stop them. I think they killed him, she said softly. And I think they made him help them first. Back at the brown stone, Wolfe listened without speaking, then issued a single instruction. Find Mendez. Saul took the assignment, and by nightfall, he had him. A former CPA who'd gone off-grid after someone slashed his tires and left a red carnation tucked beneath his windshield wiper. I still have the files, Mendez told us when we got him on the line. Constance paid me out of pocket. I think she knew she wouldn't live long enough to use them. Send everything, Wolfe said. All of it. The email arrived in encrypted bursts over the next hour. Spreadsheets, emails, shadow invoices. Beacon Reach had been siphoning money through straw firms linked to shell corporations. Most dead ends, but one address in the Bronx stood out. A florist. Red carnation florals. Saul was already halfway there. Wolfe sat back in his chair, not in victory, but in confirmation. Someone had used grief as a mask, silence as currency, and funerals as cover. But grief ends, and silence can be broken. And now Wolfe had both the motive and the method. All that remained was the confrontation, and Wolfe never held a funeral without an audience. Saul Panzer doesn't get rattled easily, which is why I paid close attention when he called from outside red carnation florals and said in a flat voice, "There's no florist." "What do you mean, no florist?" I asked. "I mean it's a boarded-up storefront with a fake sign and no door handle. Lights off, security camera over the awning. You don't install that to watch tulips." "Anyone inside?" "No movement." But a man stepped out of the alley 15 minutes ago, looked right at me, then walked away like he'd rehearsed it. Didn't even light the cigarette he was holding. Carnation in the lapel. White this time. Changing dress code? Maybe. But whoever runs this place, they're not here for the hydrangeas. "Hold the block," I said. "I'll tell Wolfe." When I got back to the brownstone, Wolfe was mid-argument with a stubborn orchid stem, gently pushing it into a new position like it had personally insulted him. He looked up as I entered but didn't speak. "Red carnation florals is fake," I said. "Front only. Boarded windows, no real door. Saul saw a lookout wearing a white flower instead." Wolfe returned his attention to the plant. "Adaptation. Someone knows we're circling. Then they're watching Saul. They're watching us, Archie. They always were." I didn't like the sound of that, but before I could press, Fritz appeared in the doorway, looking unusually grim. "Pardon," he said. "There is a visitor. She refused to give her name, but insists on speaking to Mr. Wolfe. She's shaking." That earned Wolfe's full attention. "Bring her." A moment later, a woman in her 60s entered, wrapped in a pale trench coat that looked like it had survived one betrayal too many. Her hands trembled slightly at the clasp. Her hair was silvered but sharp at the part, like she had once commanded attention and still hadn't given up the habit. She didn't wait to be seated. "I'm Vera Ambrose. I worked for the Quails for 18 years as their administrative auditor. I heard about Lemuel's death, and I think I know who killed him." Wolfe motioned silently to the red chair. She sat. "I don't mean I saw it, but I know who wanted him dead, who had reason." "Name," Wolfe said. "Clive Dorset." I felt the name land like a piece in a jigsaw puzzle we hadn't known was missing. "He ran Beacon Reach," she continued. "Still does, I suppose. Constance never trusted him. Neither did I. He was too smooth, too agreeable. The kind of man who laughs half a second after everyone else, like he's remembering how. When Lemuel brought him in, everything changed. Budgets doubled, but returns vanished." "Your role?" Wolfe asked. "I was asked to reconcile accounts and told, very explicitly, to stay away from Beacon Reach invoices. Lemuel was afraid of something. He wouldn't say it, but I could see it in his hands. Always shaking. He'd started smoking again. And yet he brought Dorset in," I said. "He didn't have a choice. Dorset wasn't working alone." "Who was he working with?" "I don't know for sure, but someone inside the Foundation. Someone with signing authority." Wolfe shifted in his chair. "You believe Lemuel was coerced?" "I know he was," she said, voice rising. "He told me that if anything happened to him, to tell the police, to look at the florist. I thought he was having a breakdown. I didn't know the florist didn't even exist." Wolfe steepled his fingers. "You have evidence?" She reached into her coat and pulled out a flash drive. "Encrypted logs. I copied them 6 weeks ago. Lemuel saw me do it. He didn't stop me." I took the drive. "You think they'll come after you?" She looked at me then. Really looked. "They already did. Someone broke into my apartment yesterday. Took nothing. Just opened every drawer and left a single carnation on the kitchen counter." Wolfe exhaled through his nose. Not a sigh. more like a silent judgment on the entire species. "You'll remain here," he said. "Fritz will prepare the guest room. Archie, take that drive to Lon Cohen. Have him verify the contents. We need corroboration from an independent source." On it, I met Lon near midnight in the kind of coffee shop that never closes and never cleans its booths. He took the drive, plugged it into a slim black laptop, and whistled low under his breath. "This is real," he said. "Time-stamped, ledger entries, emails. Looks like the Foundation's been bleeding funds through a dozen different dummy projects, all traced back to Beacon Reach. And guess who shows up as a silent partner? Clive Dorset. And someone else," Lon said. "Alias only. Marchand. Ring a bell?" "Not yet. I'll keep digging." Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was still awake, still seated, eyes closed. Fritz had long since vanished into the kitchen, and Vera Ambrose had been given the guest room per orders. "They've declared war," Wolfe said without opening his eyes. "Now we must invite the army." I knew what that meant. The next morning, we summoned the suspects. Wolfe's office was reset for performance. Chairs arranged like confessionals, windows cracked just enough to let in late morning light. Saul was stationed just beyond the vestibule. If anyone tried to leave, they'd meet Saul's suggestion not to. Miss Severin arrived first, pale but composed. Then came Vera Ambrose, carrying a folder of printed logs as backup. Isabel Rain followed, reluctant and defensive, until she spotted Saul and decided her schedule had suddenly opened up. The last to arrive was Clive Dorset. He wore a dove-gray suit and a smile you could frame. "Mr. Wolfe," he said, stepping inside as if auditioning for a mural. "A pleasure, though I admit I'm surprised to be summoned." "You're here because I permitted it," Wolfe said. "Sit." Dorset's smile stayed, but his eyes turned calculating. He took the only empty chair. "I've made it a principle never to overstate evidence," Wolfe began. "But I am prepared to state that your firm, Beacon Reach, has served as a conduit for laundering Foundation funds under the guise of consulting services that were neither rendered nor requested." "That's a serious accusation." "It is a verified one," Wolfe said, gesturing toward the logs on the desk. "You manipulated Mr. Quayle through threats and financial pressure. When Constance Quayle threatened exposure, she was eliminated. When Lemuel Quayle began to break, you attempted the same, but your timing faltered." Dorset looked around the room, saw no allies, and adjusted his cufflinks. "You can't prove any of that," he said. "On the contrary," Wolfe said. "We have records from a forensic accountant retained by Constance. We have system logs secured by Miss Ambrose, and we have eyewitness testimony placing you at both funerals, observing reactions, gauging threats. You were managing your aftermath." He paused, letting silence grow teeth. "Your carnation is wilting." Dorset glanced at his lapel. For the first time, the smile broke. "You have two choices," Wolfe said. "Confess, and perhaps spare your co-conspirator, or wait for the authorities and lose the narrative entirely. You don't have enough number, but we have too much to ignore." Saul stepped into the room. Dorset rose, then sat again as Saul placed a hand on his shoulder. A quiet surrender. When the room emptied, Wolfe finally touched the beer Fritz had brought him hours ago. "The man is a butcher," he muttered. "But he wears a flower." I sat back. "Still think funerals are peaceful?" "They are," Wolfe said, "when the dead stay dead." And with that, he closed his eyes and let the brownstone exhale. Dorset didn't speak another word as Saul escorted him out. That, in itself, said plenty. A man like that doesn't go silent unless something's collapsed, either inside or just behind him. We didn't know yet if he was the whole scaffolding or just the front, but Wolfe had stirred the right pot, and we both knew the lid wasn't back on. The others had left too. Isabel Rain with a brittle nod, Vera Ambrose with a whispered thank you to Fritz on the way out, and Miss Severin still clutching her purse like it might breathe if she loosened her grip. The brownstone felt aired out, but not yet clean, like a theater after a dress rehearsal that ended with someone walking off stage in handcuffs. I stayed seated, waiting for Wolfe to make his next move. Instead, he reached for the yellow notepad he kept beside his glass and drew a square. Then another, then a third, touching corners. 3 funerals, he said quietly. 1 real, 1 false, 1 fresh. You think there's a 4th? Perhaps. Or perhaps the dead aren't finished rearranging themselves. I waited. Wolfe never drew boxes for fun. Dorset is not alone, he said, but he is also not the mind behind this. He's an operator. Precise, quiet, unoriginal. There is a strategist still unaccounted for. I leaned forward. Marchand? He nodded once. You think it's a code name? More than that. It's a character. A creation. How do you know? Because Dorset doesn't name his partners. He obeys them. That tells us who holds the leash. The doorbell rang. I rose instinctively, but Fritz was already there. A moment later, he appeared in the doorway. Mr. Saul Panzer, he said, with a gentleman he declines to name. Wolfe straightened. Bring them. Saul entered, followed by a thin man in an overcoat too warm for the season and eyes too tired for the hour. He looked like he hadn't slept since Constance's will was notarized. This, Saul said, is Ethan Mendez. Wolfe nodded once. The accountant. Mendez stayed standing, clutching a file folder like it had been sewn to his fingers. I didn't want to come. But Saul said it wasn't safe not to. That is correct, Wolfe said. Have you been followed? I don't know. I haven't been home in 2 days. But someone left a note in my coat pocket. No one's been near me. What did it say? He pulled it from his inside pocket. A single square of ivory paper with a typed message. Sleep is not the same as death. Don't pretend otherwise. I passed it to Wolfe. He read it once and placed it beside the boxes on his pad. I've seen this typeface before, he murmured. It's from the Quayle Foundation's pre-merger correspondence. Only one person used it exclusively. He looked up at me. Call Lon. I dialed. Lon picked up on the second ring. Still awake? I asked. You say that like I sleep. We've got a name, possibly tied to the alias Marchand. Need you to search old internal Quayle files, stationery logs, signature records, anything tied to formatting. Look for full-time personnel pre-merger who handled document templates. Could be someone from communications. Give me 30. Lon hung up. Wolfe was already speaking to Mendez again. You were hired to verify the Foundation's disbursements. You uncovered the Beacon Reach diversions. Then you vanished. Why? Because someone else already knew what I found. I started getting warnings. Anonymous tips that turned out to be dead ends. One told me to look at a bank account in Zurich. When I did, the access log showed someone had used my credentials to try to wire out the balance. I got scared. Who knew your credentials? No one. Unless someone was watching my keystrokes. Installed software. I scanned for it. Nothing popped. Hardware, Wolfe said. A keystroke logger in the terminal. I never checked. I didn't think. You were supposed to be frightened, Wolfe said. Not thorough. Mendez nodded, looking 10 years older. They wanted me silent. And yet you copied the records. I sent a copy to Constance. Hard drive courier. I don't know if she ever opened it. She did, Wolfe said, and it killed her. Mendez swallowed hard. Then I should have never sent it. No, Wolfe said, softer now. You should have sent it earlier. The phone rang. I answered. Got something, Lon said. You were right. Marchand's typeface comes from an old Quayle memo template. Only person who used it consistently was their former director of communications. Name? Diana Marchand. Retired 2 years ago. Took a consultancy role no one ever checked up on. Disappeared from the books 6 months later. Address? Used a P.O. box in Jersey. Then nothing. Ghosted. I hung up. Wolfe nodded before I could speak. Of course it's Marchand. She didn't adopt a code name. She became one. I glanced at the windows, half expecting a flower to fall from the sky. Wolfe was already writing. She built the story, designed the narrative, faked Severin's death, buried the threat. When that failed, she corrected the script. With Lemuel. Dorset executed. But Marchand, she authored the funeral. I looked at him. You think she'll strike again? She already has, he said. The break-in at Ambrose's home, the letter to Mendez, the white carnation, but Dorset's in custody. And Marchand is watching. She always watches. Saul leaned forward. You want her? I want her here. That's a tall order, I said. She's a ghost. No, Wolfe said. She's a writer, and writers need a climax. I caught his meaning. Wolfe didn't want to chase Marchand. He wanted to invite her. You want to bait her. She thinks in patterns, symbols. She will not let her story end with a quiet arrest. She'll want to see the full shape of her deception, the applause of the final act. She'll come back, I said, to watch the ending. To write it, Wolfe corrected. We set the trap that night. Wolfe dictated a short notice to be leaked to the press. Subtle, innocuous, and filled with implication. Quail Foundation assets under review. Independent audit confirms beneficiary anomalies. Hearing scheduled. Not a roar, just a whisper. Enough to make Marchand think her plot had slipped from her hand. Then we waited. Fritz stayed near the window. Saul took the rooftop. I stayed by the phone, waiting for the shadow to move. It did. At 3:11 a.m., the back garden light blinked on. Wolfe, half asleep in his chair, opened one eye. She's here. And Marchand, dressed in grey, gloved and calm as fog, stepped into the library like she'd always belonged. I wanted to see, she said. You've seen enough, Wolfe replied. She looked around the room, not nervously, reverently. You understand it all, don't you? I do. Then tell me, she said softly. How would you have ended it? Wolfe folded his hands. With a single flower. Black. Marchand smiled. Too theatrical. Too honest, Wolfe replied. She turned to leave. Saul was already in the vestibule. And just like that, the author of funerals had arrived for her own. Marchand didn't struggle. That would have ruined the symmetry. She moved like someone rehearsing a goodbye. Quiet shoes, folded hands, head slightly inclined as Saul stepped behind her and closed the library door with the soft finality of a confession. Wolfe didn't rise, didn't shift. He simply waited as she turned to face him fully, her eyes taking in every inch of the brownstone like a set piece she'd once sketched in her mind. I knew it would be here, she said. Of course it would be here. I have no affinity for symbolism, Wolfe replied, but I do appreciate inevitability. She smiled faintly, a line forming at the corner of her mouth. Is that what this is? Inevitability? Yes. Not because your work was poor. It wasn't. Your deceptions were elegant, precise. But there are limits to control, and you pushed past them. I needed to. Ah, Wolfe murmured. Need. The most treacherous of justifications. She approached the edge of the rug, not stepping past it. She seemed to know better. Lemuel was weak, she said. He made a mess. Brought Dorset in too early. Got sloppy. Constance was worse. Sentimental. She couldn't keep her hands out of the archives. You could have walked away, Wolfe said. No, she replied simply. Because the foundation was rotting, and someone had to be the scalpel. Scalpels are for surgeons. You chose poison. You see it as murder. I see it as pruning. I was still standing by the window, but now I moved closer. You tried to erase Enid Severin. She was a loose thread. She would have unraveled everything. I gave her a dignified exit. You buried an empty casket. Better than a full courtroom. Constance didn't agree. No, she said softly. And that's why she died. Wolfe's fingers drummed once on the arm of his chair. You confessed too early. That was unwise. I didn't confess, Marchand said. I narrated. It's not the same thing. You came here because you wanted your ending. I came because the moment you used the word audit, I knew it was over, and over in the proper hands should still be elegant. You prefer a performance to prosecution. I prefer clarity, even if it wears chains. Wolfe let the silence stretch between them like an arch. Who else? He asked. She blinked. You didn't do this alone. Dorset was your lieutenant, but who supplied the documents? Who forged the cremation forms? She hesitated, just for a second. A twitch near the throat. There was a man, she said. Not part of the Foundation. An outsider. Hacker, mainly. Called himself Piper. Real name? I never asked. He never offered. We paid him in crypto. He sent instructions through encrypted notes. Dead drops. And where would we find this Piper? She tilted her head. You won't. That may be, Wolfe said. But we'll try. I doubt he'll make it easy. Good, Wolfe said. Neither do I. She looked at me, and for the first time her voice softened. You were the one at the cloisters, with Junior. That's right. She liked you. I get that a lot. She was the first to suspect me, you know, long before Constance. Junior never said it aloud, but I could feel it. She watched my hands. And now? She'll sleep easier. Maybe. I moved to the sideboard and poured a glass of water. Wolfe didn't ask for one, so I knew we weren't done yet. Why the carnation? I asked. She looked amused. Because red is memory. White is silence. Black is completion. The rest is just gardening. Wolfe sat back. Your garden has thorns. That's the only kind worth tending. Saul stepped closer. Marchand didn't flinch. Her poise was intact even now. But I could see it. The fine fracture at the edge of her voice. She wasn't finished with her monologue, but she knew the lights were fading. What happens now? She asked. You'll be arrested, Wolfe said. You'll be indicted. There will be articles. Perhaps a book. Eventually a conviction. No stage? This is the stage, Wolfe said. But the curtain has dropped. Fritz appeared at the threshold, expression unreadable. Wolfe nodded once, and Fritz picked up the phone to alert Inspector Kramer. A confession, even poetic, doesn't count unless the law's listening. Marchand stood still while we waited. She didn't try to run, didn't speak again. Her hands, folded before her like a prayer, never moved. Only her eyes did, scanning the room, one last draft of a scene she no longer controlled. When Kramer arrived 20 minutes later with a detective and a scowl, Wolfe gave him everything. The logs, the forged cremation documents, the connection to Piper, even the list of the Foundation's silent board members who looked the other way while their garden burned. Kramer wasn't happy, but he was impressed. Not that he'd say it. You always make it messy, Wolfe, he grunted. But damned if you don't leave it cleaner than you found it. Marchand said nothing as they cuffed her. She didn't struggle. When they led her to the front door, she paused, looked back once, and said, You missed one thing. What? Wolfe asked. I sent the black carnation yesterday. It should arrive tomorrow. Then she was gone. Wolfe didn't speak for a long moment. Then he turned to me. Find the delivery service. On it. When I tracked it down later that morning, I found the label, addressed to Wolfe. No return. Scheduled delivery. Tomorrow at noon. I handed Wolfe the printout. He looked at it for 3 seconds, then handed it back. It won't arrive. You're sure? Yes, because Marchand always needed a final beat. That was it. She bluffed. No, Wolfe said. She signed off. That afternoon, Fritz served roast squab. Wolfe ate slowly, deliberately, as if measuring the space between crimes. I was halfway through my plate when I asked, "Do you think she meant it? About pruning?" Wolfe dabbed his mouth. She believed it. That is enough. And the foundation? Now it must relearn how to grow. He finished the last bite in silence. Outside, the city kept humming. Inside, the brownstone returned to what it always was, an island of control in a sea of performance. And for now, the curtain stayed down. The next morning, Fritz placed a single package on Wolfe's breakfast tray beside the lightly buttered rye and peach preserves. Wrapped in plain brown paper, no return address, postmarked from within the city limits. Midtown, same as the florist that wasn't a florist. It was the kind of package Wolfe usually ignored on principle, but today he slid his butter knife beneath the tape without a word. Inside was a small black velvet box. He opened it carefully, and I caught the color before he did. A single black carnation. Silk, handmade. Delicate enough to pass for real if you didn't breathe too hard. Tucked beneath it, folded once and sealed with wax, was a note. Wolfe broke the seal. Read. Exhaled. "What's it say?" I asked. He slid the note toward me. I picked it up, careful not to smudge the wax. To the last reader of the script, thank you for turning every page. DM. That was it. I looked back at Wolfe. So she planned for capture. More likely, she planned for ambiguity. This was never about escape. It was about control. The ending she could write, she would write. He closed the lid of the box and set it aside like an object in a museum display. I waited for a follow-up, but he just stared out the window, sunlight feathering the orchid leaves beside him. By noon, the carnation had taken up residence on a shelf between 2 volumes of Pliny's Natural History, Wolfe's own little mausoleum for cases that refused to fully die. Marchand's final gesture joined a rare few artifacts that had outlived their court dates. I didn't like it. Felt too close, too unfinished. The foundation, meanwhile, had gone into lockdown. Isabel Rain issued a carefully worded statement to the press about internal transitions and regrettable improprieties. Enid Severin, still looking like a woman waking from anesthesia, had accepted temporary trusteeship under legal advisement. Vera Ambrose had been reinstated, and according to Fritz, who overheard Wolfe's one-sided phone call with her, she was already firing half the board. But something about Marchand's note stayed with me. It wasn't guilt. She wasn't sorry. She was just done. The press didn't get the whole story, of course. Kramer made sure of that. Wolfe gave him just enough to cement convictions, but the narrative stayed dry. No drama, no flowers, no ghosts, just numbers and names and asset trails. Still, it wouldn't stay quiet forever. That night, I found myself in the front room, pacing with a drink in hand, staring at the city through the curtains while Wolfe ran a slow fingertip along a line of text in a 16th century gardening treatise. He hadn't spoken in hours, but I could feel him thinking. Sometimes you can hear the deductions lining up like chessmen. "I don't think she wanted to vanish," I said. "She didn't," Wolfe replied. "She wanted to be understood. She thought she was right." "Worse," Wolfe said. "She thought she was necessary. And the carnation, a symbol," he said, "of her completion, but also her gamble." I turned toward him. "You think she's still writing?" "Number, but she may have left us something yet to be read." That gave me pause. "You mean another letter?" "Number A name," I sat down. Wolfe closed his book, marked the place with a sliver of ivory ribbon, and looked at me like a teacher who's decided the pupil might, just barely, be ready. "Piper," he said. "Yeah." Marchand never knew his real identity, yet he knew hers. He had access to her software, her schedules, even the layout of the Foundation servers. She was dependent on him, which means he was higher on the ladder than she thought. "Exactly. So he's not just a tech," I said. "He's an architect." Wolfe nodded. "And we don't know where he is. Not yet." Just then, the phone rang. Fritz answered in the hallway, then stepped in with a slight furrow to his brow. "It's Mr. Cohen," he said. I crossed the room to take it. "Archie," Lon said, voice low, fast, like he was walking and thinking at the same time. "Got something. Remember those logs Mendez pulled from the Foundation servers? There's a pattern in the file headers, an invisible signature." "Piper?" "Looks that way. It's not a name. It's a tag. Ocellus. Repeat appearances on 5 of the doctored documents. That means something." "Maybe." I dug into it. Ocellus Lucanus, ancient Greek philosopher, wrote about the eternity of the world. Circle structures, cycles, symbolism. "You think it's a handle?" "I think it's a calling card." That rang familiar. Marchand thought in symbols. Piper probably did too. "Anything else?" "Yeah," Lon said. "There's a rumor in the cybersecurity crowd. Ocellus was tied to a digital architect in Portugal. Calls himself Iva. Freelance. Crypto-heavy. Clean record. But he's been off-grid for 6 months." "Marchand's last 6 months?" "Yep." I looked at Wolfe, already guessing what he'd say before I said it. "Lisbon," I told him. Wolfe didn't blink. Then that's where the story moves next. "You planning a trip?" He gave me a look so withering I considered taking back the question. "No," he said, "but the next move is no longer ours." "You think Iva, or Piper, or Ocellus is already gone?" "I think he's watching, waiting to see if the stage is still his." "And if it is?" Wolfe looked down at the black carnation, then back up at me. "Then we'll be invited to the next performance. And this time, we'd be reading from a script someone else wrote first." The next morning, the brownstone was quieter than usual. Even the orchids seemed to hold their breath. Wolfe hadn't yet spoken since Fritz delivered the latest issue of the Gazette, folded crisply with a headline on page 9 that read, "International consultant linked to local financial scandal vanishes abroad." No names, just hints. But the language was unmistakably Lon's. Wolfe read the article once, set it aside, and reached for his beer with the same indifference he usually reserved for awards or client praise. I waited for him to say something, anything. Instead, he studied the black carnation on the shelf like it was still unfolding. "Iva," I said, "if he's Piper, and if Piper's Ocellus, then—" "He's not just watching," Wolfe cut in. "He's curating. He left Marchand in the spotlight, knowing she'd need it. She was always meant to be the final act. And now we're between plays." I wasn't sure I liked that metaphor. Between plays was when the stagehands moved in the dark and someone changed the scenery without permission. Wolfe didn't like transitions either. But this time, he wasn't calling the cues. "So what's next?" I asked. "We wait for him to write us in?" Wolfe frowned at that. We examine what he's already written. That meant the files. The ones Lon had decrypted and the ones Marchand had curated but never showed the board. Wolfe had them spread across his desk in a layered mosaic. Financials, staff schedules, comm logs, flagged keywords. It wasn't until the 3rd page of the Beacon Reach disbursement trail that I saw it. Something so small it should have been invisible. A notation beside a wire transfer code, -RLN. I tapped the line. "This tag show up elsewhere." Wolfe leaned forward, narrowed his eyes. "Show me another." I started digging. The symbol repeated 3 more times, small sums, under 5,000, all attached to transfer logs within the same 3-week window, 2 months before Constance Quayle died. Wolfe opened a separate drawer, retrieved a slim binder of employee ID logs. Most people wouldn't think of staff lunch purchases as relevant. Wolfe did. I scanned the vendor code column and found the match. Red Lantern Network Cafe. A clean, dim cafe on 12th Street. Late hours. No security cameras. One of those places where secrets sat more comfortably than people. Wolfe spoke without, looking at me. Take Saul. Expecting trouble? No, he said. Expecting guests. He turned away and reached for a pencil. That was the end of that. I called Saul, gave him the address and the details. He didn't say much, just 10 minutes, then hung up. That was his version of a handshake. By the time we reached Red Lantern, the clouds were pulling low across the sky like someone had shut a lid on the city. The cafe looked just as I remembered it. Brick walls, smoked glass windows, and a red paper lantern barely lit in the window like it owed the power bill money. Inside, the air was warm and cinnamon-scented, with soft music playing from a record that might have been spinning since 1962. We sat near the back, away from the windows, and ordered coffee we didn't plan to drink. See anyone familiar? I asked. Saul didn't answer right away. He nodded once toward the register. Guy behind the counter. Name's Raffi Lozano. He used to run courier routes between crypto storage lockers uptown. Quiet, clean. Then he disappeared. Marchand connection? None documented. But Beacon Reach sent payments here. We waited. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. Then the door opened. She was young. Mid-20s. Dark jacket, messenger bag, and eyes that moved like they'd learned too much too fast. She didn't order, didn't hesitate, just walked directly to Raffi, whispered something, and slid a small envelope into his hand. Then she turned to leave. Saul was already up. I followed. Outside, the street was empty. She turned left, didn't look back. Saul trailed, loose and light, until we reached the alley behind the cafe. She paused there, waited. No surprise in her face when we approached. "You're from Wolfe's office," she said. "That's right," I said. "And you?" "I'm the next envelope." Her voice was calm, but there was a wire under it. Something strained. Saul stepped to her right. I stayed to her left. She didn't flinch. "My name's Lena." "Last?" She shook her head. "Doesn't matter. Not to Wolfe. He'll understand the message." "You're from Eva?" I asked. She tilted her head. "You think this is linear?" I wasn't in the mood for riddles. Saul, less so. "Try us." She reached into her jacket and handed me the envelope. Not sealed. Inside, 1 flash drive, 1 photograph, and a handwritten card. Wolfe's name was on the card in looping, unfamiliar handwriting. "You read the first script. This is the prequel." The photo was grainy. Blurry, but it showed 2 people at a table in what looked like a train station cafe. One of them unmistakably Diana Marchand. The other was a man in profile. Young, bearded, wearing a scarf and coat too clean for a man running from anything. Wolfe would see it immediately. "Where was this taken?" I asked. Lena shrugged. "Lisbon, 5 months ago." "And now?" "Now," she said, "he's not writing anymore." "What does that mean?" She looked up at the sky, then back at me. "He's erasing." Then she turned and walked away, not fast, not slow, like someone who just handed off a secret they didn't want anymore. We returned to the brownstone at dusk. Wolfe didn't speak as I handed him the envelope. He opened it, examined the photo first, then plugged the flash drive into the secure terminal Fritz maintained under constant surveillance. Encrypted, layered in ancient Greek proverbs and Shakespeare quotes. Wolfe cracked it in 40 minutes. Inside, a map of Foundation accounts dating back 10 years. Embedded notes, a chain of fund flows that bypassed legal entities entirely. Dummy charities, educational trust fronts, all of them signed off by digital proxies, all of them marked with one name, not Piper, not Ocellus, just the architect. Wolfe leaned back. "We have it all now," I said. "No," he replied. "We have the draft, but the manuscript is still unfinished." "And the architect?" "He's building again." He looked down at the photograph. Marchand and the man in Lisbon. This was the moment she became a character. "What now?" Wolfe touched the flash drive, then the carnation. "We go backward, to the beginning, before Marchand, before Piper, before the garden." I stared at him. "How far back?" He looked at me with that particular deliberate pause that always preceded a revelation I wasn't going to like. "To the first flower," he said, and I knew we weren't between plays anymore. We were in the prologue. The silence in the brownstone had shifted. Not the usual dignified quiet Wolfe demanded, but something else. An almost expectant hush, like the walls themselves were waiting for what came next. Fritz moved carefully around the house that evening, avoiding the office except to place Wolfe's dinner tray on the credenza with a soft clink. Wolfe didn't touch it. He sat motionless at his desk, the photograph from Lisbon still in his hand, the edges slightly worn now from the weight of thought. He didn't speak until the room had dimmed into the first hour of evening, when the shadows in the corners began resembling conclusions not yet drawn. "The architect," he said at last. "Not a pseudonym. A role I was leaning against the door frame with a cup of coffee gone cold. So he's not a hacker. Number A designer. He shapes systems, constructs stories. Piper was only one of his functions, Marchand another, but neither were the first." "You're saying he's recruited people like this before?" "Worse," Wolfe said. "He cultivates them." He set the photo down and reached for the flash drive again, navigating deeper into the embedded directory tree. The folders were named cryptically. Ancient poets, extinct cities, zodiac signs, but Wolfe had seen enough riddles dressed in poetry to know where to look. In the subfolder labeled Delphi, he found a document marked only by a symbol, a spiral drawn in red. He opened it. Lines of journal entries filled the screen, each dated, each written in the same measured, detached tone. Clinical, elegant, disturbingly reflective. The voice wasn't Marchand's, nor Piper's. This was someone else entirely. Wolfe read aloud. "To alter the garden, one must first seed the soil with doubt. Corruption is not planted. It is coaxed from the roots already rotting." "Marchand?" I asked. He shook his head. "Earlier. Much earlier." The entries went back nearly a decade. Notes on charitable institutions across the Atlantic. Descriptions of subtle disinformation campaigns, leadership reshuffles, board manipulation. The same pattern repeated. Discredit the moral anchor, recruit the frightened, isolate the clever, reward the silent, and always one reference per file to a trial bloom. "The carnation," I said. "Yes," Wolfe replied. "It wasn't just a symbol. It was a stamp, an author's mark. And the black one. Completion," Wolfe said. "A test passed, or a pawn exhausted." There was one entry Wolfe lingered on longer than the others. Dated 7 years ago. The text was shorter than most. First result, promising. Subject withstood removal. Substitution held. Spectators remained unaware. Proceed to second iteration. North America. Partner recruited. DM monitored deviation. Substitution, I said. Wolfe's voice dropped. "They didn't just fake Severin's death. They've done it before. With someone real." I stepped closer. You think someone's still walking around under another name? I think someone already is someone else. That turned my stomach, because it meant the entire Quail Foundation affair wasn't just about money or power or silence. It was an experiment. A social structure, Wolfe said almost to himself, stress-tested under controlled collapse, designed for future application. Where? Wolfe closed the file. Everywhere. I didn't answer right away. Neither did he. We sat like that, me upright in the chair near the bookshelf, him sunk into the depths of his own architecture of thought, until the silence shifted again, this time with purpose. The doorbell rang. Fritz answered, then stepped into the office with an expression I hadn't seen before. Controlled, but tight around the eyes. "A gentleman to see you," he said. "He will not give a name, but says, quote, 'You've opened the prologue. Let's not make it a trilogy.'" Wolfe stood. "Bring him." The man who stepped in wore a gray coat, well cut, and a charcoal scarf knotted neatly at his throat. His hair was short, almost military. His face was unremarkable in the way professionals sometimes are, designed to be forgotten, photographed poorly, remembered inaccurately. He looked at Wolfe, then at me. "May I sit?" "You may," Wolfe said. He did, precisely. "I won't ask who you are," Wolfe said. "Good, because I'd lie. You're not Ivor." The man smiled faintly. Number Ivor was a function. "Piper?" "Another function." "The architect?" The man tilted his head. "Closer." Wolfe considered him for a long moment. "You seeded Marchand, recruited her, positioned her. She was a perfect test. And she failed." "Did she?" he asked. "She controlled a system of $30 million. She influenced federal reporting. She shaped a narrative that persisted even after her exposure. And she never revealed me." "She collapsed," Wolfe said. "That's failure." Collapse was the outcome. What was the purpose? I asked. The man looked at me. "Proof." "Of what?" "That truth," he said, "is not the opposite of fiction. It's the result of control." Wolfe interlaced his fingers. "Why are you here?" "Because you're the first variable I didn't account for." "Flattery is not necessary." "Not flattery," the man said. "Recognition. You're the only one who didn't seek to profit or disappear. You followed the design. To undo it. And you did. Almost." Wolfe's voice sharpened. "Why not disappear?" The man leaned forward. "Because this isn't an end. It's an offering." "To whom?" "To you." He reached into his coat and withdrew a slim envelope. I half stood. Wolfe raised a hand. "Let him." The man placed the envelope on the edge of the desk. "I call it the Nero sequence, an unfinished architecture. I want you to read it. And if I refuse, then you'll never know whether it ends with you," the man said, "or begins." He stood, nodded once, and left the way he came. Wolfe didn't touch the envelope. Not for a long time. Finally, he spoke. "Archie." "Yeah?" "We may have closed the case, but not the curtain." He nodded. The envelope sat untouched on the desk between us, waiting. Wolfe didn't open the envelope that night. He didn't open it the next morning either. It sat untouched on the corner of his desk for 2 days, a quiet intruder in a room that had no patience for ambiguity. He didn't speak of it, didn't mention the man in the gray coat again, and didn't ask me to follow up with Saul, who, by habit or intuition, also said nothing. For a time I wondered if Wolfe was stalling, that maybe this whole case had gotten too close, too abstract, even for him. But the longer I watched him, his pacing before the bookshelves, his quiet hours in the plant room, his almost meditative silence over meals, I began to realize what he was actually doing. He was waiting to see if the architect blinked first. It happened on the 3rd day. A courier delivered a small package wrapped in pale green linen. No return address, but the handwriting on the label was familiar. Inside, a single object, A white carnation. It wasn't silk. This one was real. Fresh. Deceptively simple. Wolfe didn't react outwardly. He set the flower down beside the black one without comment, but I could tell he'd seen what mattered. "Concession?" I asked. "No," he said. "Reset." He reached for the unopened envelope at last. Tore the flap cleanly. Inside, a sheaf of thin paper, tightly written, typed in the same ancient serif used in the earlier files. At the top, a title, "The Nero Sequence. Revised Draft." Wolfe read it in full. Twice. When he finished, he slid it across the desk to me. I skimmed the first paragraph and felt a slow chill settle between my shoulder blades. It wasn't a threat. It was a proposition. The architect had laid out a theoretical model, a new system for influence, disinformation, control. But this time, the proposal wasn't for another Marchand or another Piper. This time, he offered Wolfe the opportunity to intervene, to become the opposition within the story, the editor to the narrative, to be written in. "It's a trap," I said. Wolfe didn't look up. "Yes, but one that flatters." "Also yes. And you're not tempted?" He finally raised his head. His eyes were calm, deliberate. "Temptation," he said, "is for those who believe they can hold the reins. I do not presume such foolishness." I exhaled. "So you'll decline?" "No." I stared at him. "What?" "I will reply. But you just said, I will write the ending myself." It took me a second. Then I understood. Wolfe wasn't accepting the architect's offer. He was responding with a counterscript. Not participation, not resistance. Correction. He dictated the letter that afternoon. Short, sharp. Pure Wolfe. To the author of Systems, you mistake elegance for immunity. That is your flaw. You believe the one who designs the trap cannot be caught inside it. But a trap, no matter how ornate, still requires bait, and you are no longer behind the curtain. You are on the stage, and I am still seated. N. He signed it, folded it, handed it to me. "Deliver it through Cohen. Lon won't like it. He won't have to." I took the letter to Lon the next day. He didn't ask questions, just gave a low whistle and a raised eyebrow, then slid it into a manila envelope without another word. By the time I got back, the black carnation was gone from the shelf. So was the white. Dinner was salmon. Wolfe ate slowly, one eye on the orchids. I didn't ask where the flowers went. I didn't need to. After coffee, I stood at the office window and watched the lights of the city flicker like thoughts in a restless mind. Wolfe was behind me, flipping through an old botanical index. "You think it's over?" I asked. "No." "But you're done?" "Yes." I turned. "Why?" "Because," he said, "this is where the book closes. If he continues, it will not be this book. It will not be mine." That was Wolfe. He didn't need to win every game, just to end the one he was in on his own terms. Later that night, as I locked the front door and turned out the hallway light, I saw a single petal on the floor beneath the umbrella stand. Silk, black. I left it there. Some things belong to stories that don't want endings. And Wolfe remains where he always does. Immovable, deliberate, undefeated. The author of conclusions. And the last man standing in the room after the final line is written.